Welcome. I'm grateful for both the leaders of SMIILD, including Phil and Miriam, who are here this evening, and the strong connection to First UU Church, and grateful that it's our justice partner for the month of February, highlighting that important work in the community and continuing to learn more about the needs that are out there and how we can participate in that. So wherever you are, I invite you just to take a moment of gratitude, take a breath. We have so few options and invitations sometimes to take a breath in our daily lives. So take a breath. I'll light a chalice here. Gratitude for community and for justice work and for our time together and for all of you. So with that, I'll turn it over to Phil for our forum on SMIILD.
Thank you, Luke. And I have a PowerPoint presentation to go through, and I'll start it right now.
Hi, everybody, and thank you to Phil that he's prepared, but I'm here to answer any questions too.
That's Miriam Goodson. She's a member of our SMIILD board, and we are people of faith committed to justice. Sometimes it's simply a matter of faith in the generosity of our community and supporters. So we are a nonprofit organization under Minnesota law. We have a board and everything. Our fiscal sponsor is the Diversity Council. That's a 501c3 organization. And we just entered into, starting in January, our third year of a contract with Immigrant Law Center of Minnesota and the Advocates for Human Rights. We have an 11-member board made up of members of faith communities and organizations related to immigrants from across the southeastern Minnesota region. Freeborn County, Winona County, and Olmsted County are the sources now of membership. A brief chronology of where we came from and where we're ending up right now. Back in March of 2017, First UU and Peace UCC started the process of declaring themselves sanctuary congregations, and both of these faith communities did that in September, October of 2017. We had a number of faith groups and community groups support us in this, and we formed a network, Sanctuary Support Network, and then a coalition. And that coalition, the Rochester Interfaith Immigrant Rights Coalition, proposed to the Olmsted County board that the county establish a legal defense fund for people in immigration court and in ICE detention, because that's what Hennepin County and Ramsey County were doing. We worked on that for a little over a year and then abandoned that effort because it was pretty clear it wasn't going anywhere. And so we created our own nonprofit organization called SMIILD. We considered RILD, Rochester, and OILD, Olmsted, but we thought southeastern Minnesota made sense because we are an integrated economic community, first and foremost, but also because SMIILD is a much nicer acronym. From January of 2019 through August, we were fundraising for this effort across southeastern Minnesota. And by August, we had enough money to start a contract with our two providers. So in September, we worked on what the contract should say, and in October, they started offering services. Within about 6 or 7 months, we realized we had to amend the contract to address bail defense because ICE was holding people who were eligible for bail and failing to release them, or failing to honor their eligibility for bail. And in the summer of 2020, we ended up amending the contract again to provide for habeas defenses because we were winning cases and yet not getting detainees released. And so then we had to go through another court system to get those those people, get ICE to release the people that they were holding past the time of losing their case, ICE losing their case. In January of 2022, we entered into a new contract that we negotiated over the fall that provides for defense for people who are not in detention. Our first priority was and remains detention, but we have the interest and the ability to address people who are not in detention also. Legal representation matters because it makes a huge difference in immigration law, whether or not you have somebody knowledgeable handling your case. We have a number of examples we could give you that would take too long of people who tried to represent themselves and were basically about to be deported when the attorneys we sponsor were able to step in and prevent that and actually gain release. The other issue is simply a justice issue. Equal protection and equal access to justice applies to everybody. And it clearly means a lot more if you have access to legal expertise. For southeastern Minnesota, there are about 33,000 people who are here who were born in another country. All of those and a certain share of the people who were born here are at risk of running afoul of ICE one way or another. 7,000 are most at risk because they are undocumented. This is based on national and county level data extrapolated for our region. Point out that the native-born population includes roughly 4,400 children in our region who are the children of couples who have at least one undocumented parent. And here's our distribution. Olmsted County has about half of the region's foreign-born population and 3/8 of the region's undocumented population. And is followed by Rice and Mower County, and then it falls off from there. Wherever there are concentrations of people working in lodging, construction, the restaurant industry, meat packing, or agriculture generally, we have undocumented people handling those jobs. Most of the people who are in ICE detention and who end up being deported have done nothing that would end up getting them, have anything happen to them. 47% have no criminal background whatsoever. 22% have only an immigration offense, and whatever that number that's right behind the screen, 11% have a minor offense that would result in something like a fine. We have a case, one of the first case we won, in fact, a person from Mower County who had never lived in South Sudan, but that was his nationality, was arrested on a marijuana possession offense. And he was actually on the plane to be deported when his private attorney was able to intervene. But then his family couldn't continue to pay for the private attorney. And when we took over the case about a year later, we were able to file his appeal and get him released after 2 years in jail on the grounds of that if he were to be returned to a country he'd never been in, speaking a language he didn't know, he would be at risk, serious risk of torture and death and so on, all the bad things. He's now has a job and is enrolled in whatever the community college down there is called, River something. Maybe somebody knows. In Minnesota, the ratio of people who are in ICE detention who would not end up in prison were they citizens is 68%. Although in that serious category are things that are only serious categories for immigrants, and those include things like crossing over the border illegally more than once. But 68% at least are the cases that we would take, because our criteria are they have to have an income less than 2 times poverty. You can't be represented by a private attorney already or currently, and you have at least a snowball's chance of succeeding. That snowball can be very, very small. But basically our goal is, unless there's absolutely no chance to succeed in a case, we want to help you. So we've been at it for 2.25 years. Our attorney teams have screened 440 persons. 42 of those were from southeastern Minnesota, with incomes under twice the poverty level. We've represented 14 individuals. The countries of origin include these ones that are listed here. And these are the counties that they've come from. Of those 42 cases, 10 had no viable case. So that's 25%. 12 either declined to be represented or had a private attorney already. And that's about half and half. And the reasons people decline to be represented are that they despair of success, or that the conditions in ICE detention are so miserable that that they don't want to stay there any longer. We were unable to take 6 cases due to capacity constraints, and part of that has to do with this outcome pending thing. If we're working on things like getting somebody out whose case has already been won, and we have a habeas case to take to a different court, that eats up some of our resources, and so that's unfortunate, but that's how it goes sometimes, I guess. We've lost 1 and won 5. This one that we lost, we offered to appeal. We thought we had a good chance to win on appeal, but that detainee decided he didn't want to extend his incarceration. COVID is a factor in this. Currently, every wing of the ICE detention facility in Freeborn County has a COVID case going on, or several actually. And so the risk of catching COVID has been a deterrent, and that has induced people to choose deportation rather than take that chance. So our challenge for year 3 that we're starting, we're going to try to assist 100% of the people in detention who are seeking representation, which we've been doing. And we are going to keep on handling bond and habeas cases as they arise. I want to give the example of another client, by the way. This is one that the UU Church was involved in. Client C won his case in March and would have been released normally, we thought, except that ICE insisted that he had to have a required physical first, and they wouldn't provide it because of all their resources being tied up with COVID. So our attorneys asked if there was some other way to get a physical, and they said, yes, you can go through this preferred physician. It would cost $1,600. The family came up with part of that, then the UU Church came up with the balance of it. And so we got the physical, and that was all good, except that then they decided, well, we may appeal this case. So we waited for them to appeal, and then in August, after we amended our contract to cover this kind of thing, our attorneys took ICE to court outside the immigration court system on a habeas corpus case. We won that case, and that gave ICE 90 days to release this client. And they took all 90 days. We won that. We got the court's judgment at the end of December, and they released the client at the end of March 2021. A year in jail for no purpose related to client C. I think the purpose for ICE is if they can convince other detainees that even if they win, we still got you, then that'll induce more of those detainees to self-deport, voluntarily agree to a removal. That's just my theory. You know, who knows? We are adding non-detained persons to our potential clients. There are 853 non-detained immigration cases in the immigration case backlog that are from our section of the state, about 9,000 statewide. 370 clients in southeastern Minnesota who are in that backlog lack representation. And we can, with current resources, we can support, we think, probably 4 to 5 cases per year. We're hoping that number goes up. The average wait before a non-detained hearing is 800 and some days. And then because we're handling asylum cases, we have to be ready for the fact that most asylum cases don't win. Chances of success are twice as high if you're represented, but they're still pretty low. They're only a third, basically. Nevertheless, asylum cases are part of the group that desperately need representation because they're here because they're fleeing circumstances that are deplorable. So we're all in favor of representing that group. And that's it for the SMIILD part of this. I did want to talk about Rochester Interfaith Immigrant Rights Coalition, but before I get to that, let me go back to this. Some of us in the UU Church are dealing with a family of asylum seekers, and we hope to represent them. The situation now is that Advocates for Human Rights is trying to schedule, finding time for a intake session. It could be that the family will be, they'll probably take the case, I think, but there may be some conditions like you have to not work without work authorization. And that would mean that we would have to support that family some other way until they can gain work authorization. It's not impossible. Winona County, Winona City, basically, population of under 30,000, has organized a community support system to do just that for a family of asylum seekers. And they are not employed for now until they can get work authorization. So it can be done, but it will take a community effort, I think. So that's SMIILD. And keep your questions till the end, I guess. We also are still operating the Rochester Interfaith Immigrant Rights Coalition. And the main activity lately has been working with the city clerk, the library, and the city council on municipal ID. That will go before the city council pretty soon. I'm not sure when, but sometime within the next few months. The city council seems to be favorable to the idea. The advantage of a municipal ID would be that it won't cost as much as a state, Minnesota ID. And if people need some sort of local ID, it will have their the name, their address, and so on, and be useful for things like cashing checks, picking up prescriptions, and so on. There are several groups besides immigrants who would benefit from this. So when that comes up, make sure you let your council member know that you support it. I've also been addressing collaboration with ICE on the part of the sheriff and the county attorney, and we've gotten nowhere with that. Recently, ACLU won a case with Anoka County that directly parallels some of the practices that our sheriff has been doing. Basically, notifying ICE of every foreign-born person and holding those people until ICE can get there by slow walking their release when they're held on something like, for example, a minor traffic violation or an unpaid fine. And so perhaps after this recent Minnesota Supreme Court case, maybe we can make more progress there. At the state legislative level, it sure would be great to get Minnesota's driver's license issued on the basis of skill, not citizenship, as it was before the Pawlenty administration. And we've also done a fair amount of publicizing immigrant rights issues. And you can help by helping to promote municipal ID. Do whatever you can to influence the sheriff and county attorney. Write legislators in favor of driver's license legislation, and support legislation prohibiting county jail use by ICE. There are now 4 or 5 county jails that are making money hand over fist, basically, by renting space to ICE. It flies in the face of public safety, basically, if you have people who are afraid to report real crimes because of the prospect of ending up in jail for being foreign-born, basically. At the federal level, we need, especially with the current situation with DACA, but for all of the 11 million undocumented people, we need a bunch of changes to make that system humane. These are just 8, but they all kind of make sense to us. On a personal level, there's an organization called Conversations with Friends, and the website is down there. We have a couple of members of the UU Church who are part of this, who correspond with people in ICE detention. It's a morale boost for them. You can also, and this is key, of course, donate to SMIILD through the Diversity Council. You write the check to the Diversity Council with SMIILD in the memo line, and that will help us represent not only all of the people in ICE detention, but more than 4 or 5 non-detained cases. So, final words. We have on our board, we have Catholics, Lutherans, Methodists, Unitarians, Congregationalists, Jews. In our larger organization, we have Muslims. So we represent a wide range of community organizations and faith traditions, but our moral compasses all point in the same direction, toward justice. And that's what I have for a presentation. Got to quit sharing here somehow. There you go. All right. Miriam and I are available for questions or for arguments too. We're good.
Thank you, Phil. And Miriam, is there anything you wanted to add to Phil's presentation before we open it up?
That the way that we present SMIILD right now to the community, it is like an awareness, because the fear is there in the community, and Phil doesn't have to put it on a PowerPoint. Like, we wish we could represent more people, but truly people don't talk about this that much until they are in the detention. So it's not like something that we can prevent because we do not know who's going to end up in the detention center in Olmsted County. And we have taken cards to the detention center, so it's up to the guards there to give them a card so they know that they have some rights and that they have some hopes. So sometimes we have brought what we presented today in occasions like when the Mexican consulate is in town, to tell people that the fear, nobody can take away the fear that they have, but if there is hope that if somebody really gets in trouble, that we have a way to go and rescue them, hopefully they'll keep it in their heart, because nobody wants to talk about it.
I guess I should add that the reason for our focus on detained people is that there's a backlog for non-detained people. There is no backlog for people in detention. ICE is very, very aggressive in taking those detained people to court if they need to. Their first priority is to get them to voluntarily self-deport. And part of that is make their lives miserable. But part of it also is that they hasten to take anybody who wants to defend themselves through the system, so they can get them out of the country as quickly as possible. Once they're out of detention, then their priority drops off precipitously, and that's why you have this 9,000 case backlog.
And when in the presentation talks about the DACA students, we didn't know that it's also a big backlog. So a lot of people are here without us knowing that they are in the DACA documents. So it interrupts their lives big time when they cannot process their permits to work here. So right now I know that there is a backlog there too. And in this administration, they talk about, at least our current president said that he was going to work on it, but they promised things, but at the time, no progress has happened. And I know that it's COVID-19, but there's right now the hope is getting like crushed for a lot of people.
And to discuss that a little bit, when we started, there were just in southeastern Minnesota, there were 102 people in southeastern Minnesota that were part of our screening. After COVID started, it dropped off to 50, and after the change in administration, it dropped off to 12 to 20 or so. So the number of people in ICE detention has fallen. The number that we are representing has stayed constant, partly because we have this long tail. We take a case and we have eight clients that are still, for whom the decision is still pending. So.
And when IELTS, the Immigration Legal Center, represents them, they have to have some kind of a cushion. They know it's going to take a long time to process them. Like what Phil was talking, a year, that's already when he was out. So like saying, this is a long process.
Yeah, he wasn't out. He had just won.
They just won. Right. Yes, right. He needed to just be let out and know. Yeah.
So maybe we should take some questions. Anybody? Robin.
How many lawyers do you have working for the organization? How many attorneys are at work on this?
It varies. There are two organizations that are both nonprofit legal defense organizations, the only two in the state. And they enlist a lot of pro bono attorneys. And then they also, in one case that we won, was won by a group of law students at John Mitchell Law School that they enlisted. One pro bono guy represented somebody and found out that he was actually a citizen. He was about to be deported. He was a citizen living in Winona County from Sierra Leone. He moved here when he was 2 years old. His mother became a US citizen while he was still a minor. And they were ready to deport him. They had actually scheduled the plane. So he had I don't know that they give you a ticket, but they give you something that gets you on the plane. And because he was represented, they said, well, you don't really ought to check this first, but he is a citizen. And it's appalling. It's appalling that our government, the government that is of the people, and we're the people, right, does this sort of thing.
Any other questions?
Well,
Bob.
how's your budget? I mean, how is this have your funds? I know it takes a lot of money with these legal things.
Well, we on our two and a quarter years, we've spent about $40,000 a year on our legal defense of the 14 people. So 40,000 divided by 14 is whatever that amounts to.
Mm-hmm.
And that again is relying on pro bono help and students and so on. Once we get into as Miriam said, once we get into the non-detained defenses, we're gonna, instead of using kind of an hourly basis reimbursement, we're gonna set aside a chunk of money that's gonna handle not only the initial appeals, but also this long tail of waiting for ICE to respond. And I think that number is going to come around to somewhere like $5,000 or $6,000 per case, at least initially.
Wow.
I should point out also, we have received a grant from the Winona Diocese, or the Rochester Winona Diocese, and we have received support from a group at Carleton College. And let's see, there's a group called Amparo through the local Lutheran Synod. But all the rest of it has been private, either through, about half of it's been through organizations like the Sisters of St. Francis or the Methodist Church and so on, or private individual donations.
Thank you.
Yep. Well, Sandy, you nodded your head. That's tantamount to asking a question. All right.
I'm just sad that this has happened, that it hasn't stopped. It hasn't changed.
She might have been nodding her head when I kind of said a lot of good uses for money.
True enough.
True enough.
Yes. I think about the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of young men and women we saw released by ICE in Brownsville when we were volunteering. And then I think about each, just knowing the one family that we do from Nicaragua that came here. And then you think about all those hundreds and hundreds and up to thousands released, and they're going somewhere with being met by someone, but then how do we know how many that breaks down for and what happens to them in the end? And then they still they're happy to be safe, they're happy to be here, but they still have a long fight to be approved for asylum. Thank you for your work, Miriam and Phil and your group.
And Sandra, this is interesting what you just mentioned, because sometimes I do sign up people for help out, just signing them up for things. And the question that I normally ask, do you have any ID? Do you have any, I mean, because that's normally in the surveys question, like, what do you use for an ID? And amazingly, no, they don't even want, the moment that you ask a question related to an ID, all of a sudden say, who's gonna see this? I mean, it's just unbelievable, the connection that is in their brain to protect themselves, not to become invisible. But I mean, if they have children, citizen children, the children have been able to get a lot of the resources. So that's been so good. Three Rivers Community Action Program, Olmsted County also did a very good job during the pandemic, and a lot of organizations. And the number one thing that we were advocating, please do not ask for an ID, because I mean, there will be an identification with an address and things like that, but don't ask, because they will stop the help. They won't, it's hard.
That's one thing about the municipal ID I want to point out. And once it's authorized, everybody should get it. So that having it won't be considered, you know, if I present my municipal ID and I don't look like I'm from any place beyond at least Ohio, that kind of legitimizes the use of municipal ID. But again, back on the issue of asylum seekers and so on, the people who are most at risk of deportation are the people who are in detention. And that's, we have to maintain our focus on that, because those are the ones that they get after right away. Those are the ones whose lives they try to make as miserable as possible. And those are the ones who are at risk of deciding to give up and self-deport. So, you know, our record is pretty good with that group. 5 out of 6, and maybe we would have won 6 out of 6 had we persuaded the guy to go ahead with the appeal.
Phil?
Yeah.
Be clear, when you say people are in detention, do you mean in jail?
Yeah, they're in jail. They are either in Freeborn County Jail, Sherburne County Jail, or some other county jail that ICE is renting space from.
This may not be exactly related to your organization, but maybe the Afghan families who have been flown over, and a lot of them are in Wisconsin, I guess. Are they having to claim asylum somehow? Or are they going to have to go through the legal system? Do you know about that at all?
Right now, they have a unique category. They're humanitarian something. They're not refugees officially, and they're not asylum seekers officially. And there is a move afoot to support legislation to grant them, you know, a long-term permanent sanctuary type status. And that's something that needs to be handled through the federal, you know, through Congress, to resolve the circumstance that the Afghan population is in. In case anybody on the call, on the Zoom thing doesn't realize it, the UU Church is sponsoring an Afghan family, and that is strikingly different from asylum seekers. Circumstances are similar. They're leaving desperate situations in their home country. But the Afghan program is operated with federal funding through Catholic Charities, and there's a pretty strong support system for at least the first 6 months, maybe longer, as opposed to essentially nothing other than what a sponsor or a sponsor group will organize for asylum seekers. And so it's a different challenge. Anything else?
Yeah, you talked about conversations with friends.
Yep.
Is that emails or is that sending cards? How does that work?
Well, Victoria Moore would know because she's a conversation with friends person. You know Victoria? I think it's probably handwritten simply because access to electronics is not that easy, but I don't know. Pre-COVID, you used to be able to go to the jail and visit. I suspect with the outbreak in Freeborn County Jail, they're probably not allowing that. Do you know, Miriam? No.
No, I have not written any letters. I'll ask Isaiah group if there is something else. Well, that, I mean, the email that you provided must be a way, but I know that there are people that had been asked to go and be at an immigration procedure to witness what's going on, to understand how broken the system is. But right now, because of COVID-19, there hasn't been any more tours or those kind of trips.
And I guess I was a little confused too. There's a completely separate judicial system for immigration cases. Are they in our standard courthouse, or are they held in a federal courthouse? Or
it's a completely separate system. It's actually immigration judges are appointed by the Attorney General. So if you think about some of our recent attorney generals, that's kind of a daunting prospect on its own. And that's why when you win a case there and ICE nevertheless refuses to release them, but then that's when you appeal to a federal court. And that's in St. Paul. The cases are all, the immigration cases are all heard, I think, at Fort Snelling or in Bloomington, one of the two. Fort Snelling. So it's a separate quasi-judicial system, I guess. Good question, though. How Byzantine could it get? It could hardly get any more Byzantine, you know.
And then what we've heard about it is just terrible, that they even put children in front of a judge to represent themselves. Things like that, like.
You mentioned all these countries that these clients come from. Do they all need translators? Because that's a whole other area of volunteers needed.
Yeah. Well, probably, maybe.
No, it is. They need a court certified interpreter. And
the ones that the 14 that we have handled, a lot of them have grown up here. The guy that I mentioned from Mower County with minor marijuana offense, the guy from Sierra Leone, a couple of Somalis from Rochester. So they're perfectly fluent in English, but no doubt, luckily, our both the sets of attorneys are fluent in Spanish, enviably fluent. Both of those sets. And the other thing is that both organizations have in-house translating staffs. When you talk about like South Sudanese languages, I know they're equipped to deal with it, but I don't know how exactly. Let me think if there's anything else I can I can bring up. Yes, you want to hear about the guy with the kittens? I'm sure you do. We have a guy in Rochester who had a minor traffic offense, and he was unable to pay the fine because he lost his job due to COVID. And so unbeknownst to him, when you don't pay a fine for long enough, there's a warrant issued for your arrest. And so he found a bunch of stray kittens, and he thought the responsible thing to do was to take them to the animal shelter. And so he did. And the animal shelter asked for ID, and he presented his, his ID, his foreign-born person ID, and they did a check on it and found out that he had an outstanding warrant. And so they had him stay there until the sheriff could get there and transport him to the Olmsted County Jail. Now, the Olmsted County Jail has a practice of whenever there's somebody who's foreign-born, and this is exactly the case that was brought up in Anoka County, they notify ICE. His family went to pay the fine so they could get him out of jail. And by the time they got there, he had already been turned over to ICE. So they paid more than a family like that can afford. They actually had to, raise their own money, and they got their church, the Iglesia Cristo El Rey, to come up with some. Others in the community donated and got him out, bailed out, and he has a private attorney. And this is all because of a traffic offense and turning in some stray kittens. And it's just outrageous. You know, this is not only our federal government doing this kind of thing, it's our local elected officials. We've talked to Sheriff Torgerson about this a number of times, and this case in particular once. And his position is he's not going to not cooperate with law enforcement agencies. Well, ICE is hardly a law enforcement agency. It's not a public safety agency. It's a control immigration agency, I guess. I'm not sure what they do, or why they do it, but they're certainly not protecting public safety when they throw somebody in detention for turning in stray kittens, young ones. So anyway, there's another anecdote. This is a guy whose case, if he ends up not being able to pay for a private attorney, I would like to take. You know, I'd like to have SMIILD support. Any other questions? Oh, there's something on the chat. I've been ignoring the chat. Hold on. Oh, that's Luke. He has to step away for a while. And you can give throughout February through the church shared plate or directly to www.uurochmin.org.give. Just make sure you put SMIILD in the memo line. www.smiild.org. Donate is another way to get to us. Okay, but I just want to check to make sure there's nothing else in the chat. Okay, and Sandy.
So if I gave to Share the Plate, half of the money would stay with the UU Church. If I gave to SMIILD directly, it would all go to SMIILD, right?
You're muted.
I don't know that's still true about the donation through the church, but it certainly is true that if you give directly to SMIILD, all but 2% of it goes to us. We have no expenses, except for that the Diversity Council retains 2% to handle our finances.
And this is a great cause. I mean, it's a way to provide hope to a lot of people living in fear. I personally, I mean, we couldn't have done this without you already, part of the UU Church and all the social justice groups from a lot of churches. So giving an opportunity to act on the right thing. we're managing the fundings very well because we have a board and two groups, the coalition, that is the Rochester Interfaith Immigration Rights Coalition.
There, I put a background so you know where to give.
Well, not a question, but a comment, Phil. Thank you for all that you're doing, and thank you for a great presentation. And you too, Miriam.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So Phil, I clicked on the link that Luke shared with us, and there's a donate thing, and then there's a I'm just, what's the best way that we can have most of our donations go to this defense fund?
The thing with the donate button is like that goes through a GoFundMe account, and
Right.
because it's credit card, it takes 3%, and then it still requires management by the diversity council. So you end up with like 95% instead of 98% of the money going to us. So the best way, although it does cost a stamp, is to send that check to the diversity council. So then it's everything but that 55 cents and the 2%.
So, all right, when you say send the check, you mean like write out a check and send it?
Mail it. Yeah, you know, it's
Okay, no, I mean that whatever is going to get the best bang for our buck.
Just make it out
Go
to.
for- you know, if you are the kind of person who can actually, you know, go get to a mailbox, GoFundMe still works. You know, it's good. It's okay. You know, I'm for really, let's say it's, you know, you give like $10,000-$20,000, you don't want 2% or 3% of it to go to another organization.
Right. So I'm thinking, where is my dollars going to have the biggest impact?
Yeah. Right.
Okay, I'll write a check. I can still do that.
Otherwise, if you write the check to the Diversity Council, you write SMIILD in the memo line, or?
Very good. Yes, yes, indeed.
Okay.
Good. That
I did
well,
put-
you're repeating the exact words I should have been saying all along. Thanks for coming. Tell your friends about our show.